Okay.
Is it running now, Elian?
It's running. We can
Okay.
see everything is full
All right.
screen. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And I'm not sure, I cannot see the people that's attending. So good morning to you all. I'm sure Richard is still there. So Richard, yeah, I will try to make up for that one. Thank you for a good presentation on your side, Richard. I decided to do the applied nutrition today through case studies. So there's lots of them, and even on the publication that will be shared to you afterwards, there's more of them, but there's no time to really go through everything in my time constraint. So thank you for the opportunity. It's always nice working with young upcoming veterinarians and also some of the seniors that's now joined into this meeting. So applied nutrition, if we have to talk nutrition-wise on dairy farms, or let me rather say ruminant farms, I think we can't do it in 1 hour. And that's why I decided to do this morning through case studies and just talk you through the process of applying nutritional knowledge in a team of people on that specific farm. So to just summarize, what will we handle today? It's the evolution of dairy farms over the last few years. We will stop and just visit the short few slides on specific modeling. How do we do that? And then take it through case studies with farms where we experience on acidosis or roughage quality, or problems on the heifer growing side, or minerals. And we always say, if we talk applied nutrition, it's supplying the optimum nutrients to those animals, but not looking only on paper side, what nutrients are we supplying to those animals, but also picking up some or looking at animals and the signals that we evaluate in those camps or in those sheds, and try to manage that through a lot of things that we do and data that we get from those specific animals or the applications that they use, to really take the data and the change protocols on those farms to really get the best out of the nutrients that we supply to those animals. As we are aware, and I'm sure that you've seen this in many presentations, our dairy farms are getting bigger, and that's due to narrow profit margins and increased feed costs and labor costs. So all these farms are getting bigger to make money, or better, more money. And because they get bigger, they normally are managed through more skilled people. And I actually enjoy that. I enjoy working with big farms because they are so focused on efficiencies and what they do. And for me, it's really nice working with those farms, because they also involve a lot of other consultants and specialists, and we all share data to really try to optimize those farms. So taking you through a few of these slides is where did we come from, the mid-60s. You will see, if you look at some of these photos, that was typically a farm where my dad was farming and also working with specialists overseas. That was a typical American farm. And these days we have, like in the middle photos, more sheds, more focused with in cows where we have TMR systems. But also if you go to big pasture farms, they are so focused on what they do and getting bigger and more technology driven. If you look at the bottom, that was the old way of milking cows, what we've done when I was a kid 40, 50 years ago, in comparison to these big milk parlors and even the robotic milkers that you can see in the bottom middle picture. that we see on farms. There's only one robotic in South Africa currently, but we see a lot of these robotic milking parlors where we work overseas in dairy herds. Going into a more nutritional side, we see a lot from the older systems being used a few years ago in comparison to these massive TMR mixer wagons that you can see that is self-driven. But when you use equipment like that to be more efficient in nutrition and mixing your TMRs, we see that you need a lot of people with good skills to drive these machines, but also to understand the technology in them on their scaling systems and to be more accurate. So this is just where we come from and where we are today. If we talk about applied nutrition, a lot of new equipment that we use, but I will stop at some of the other technologies a little bit later. So if we talk applied nutrition, there's a whole operational management function on a farm, not only from the farmer itself, but there's a lot of specialists, as I already mentioned, like nutritionists and veterinarians and genetic advisors and financial advisors. And then on many farms, they use management consultants. If you look at the photo, you'll see the farmer in the bottom trying to keep up this roughage production side, as well as nutrition, the health and the reproduction, many factors that they need to keep up to date with to really drive efficiencies, because the profit margins are so small. And to do that, they need all these skilled people to help them, especially on the big farms that operate these days. Now, if I compared when I started in '93 in the industry, there was many farms around South Africa with 60 and 70 cows, and now my average herd size is close to 900 that I work with. So a lot of cows on those farms, and to handle and manage those farms, you need equipment. Now, nutrition, if we talk nutrition, it's not only about crude protein or the energy or the fiber fractions in our diets, or even the minerals and the vitamins or the water. It's much more than that. It's easy to formulate the diet on paper with my model, but it's the difficult side of that is to get that in front of the animals and to make sure that every bite is what I formulate with. And every bite is the same 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And to do that, you need to apply a lot of other skills to that farm to really make sure that we get what I formulated into those cows. And that's not always easy for a farmer, but we will get through a few of these, what we've seen, and how do we apply our knowledge. Now, we all know that nutrition is 65% of the cost of a dairy operation these days. I think over the last 12 months, we saw on many farms that 65% of the nutritional cost of a farm operation, it went up with the expense of maize and the soya prices and even the lucerne prices over the last 12 months, up to 73% of the total cost of dairy. And even on pasture-based farms, we saw a huge increase in cost, in feeding cost, due to this higher raw material prices that people saw in the market. Now, to optimize the feeding cost, we need data. Everything is about data on a dairy farm. We actually played around last night in new predictors with some other consultants to really get more detail out of the cows to optimize our nutrients. And it's amazing what people and engineers are developing for dairies to optimize their profitability. Now, I'm not going into the detail of the requirements of animals, but we all know that it's influenced by many factors. And we measure a lot of these things to see, are the animals, the cows as well as the heifers, are they efficient on what they do? So we look at things like, not in South Africa a lot, but where we work in overseas countries, there's a lot of them that we need to look at methane and phosphorus legislation. How much are we excreting? We look at reproduction figures, animal data like body mass, body condition score, daily losses after calving. We look at the milk and the milk solids, mastitis, a lot of these factors that we need to check on a daily basis. We also need equipment to predict pH in the rumen. We daily look at feed intakes and rumination and a lot more. So this is just many factors, or some of them, that we on a daily basis look at to make sure that are they efficient. So, and all these things change the requirement of the animals for nutrients. So depending on how far they walk, or are they in sheds, are they on pastures, to really predict our nutrients that we supply them more efficient, but also to get the cost down per liter of milk produced. So to do precision farming or applied nutrition, we focus a lot on profitability and many features that I just mentioned in the previous slide. And to do that, you need a team. Me as a nutritionist cannot check everything, but with my colleagues on the veterinarian side and the genetic advisors and management consultants, we share all the data that we can get on a specific farm with the farm manager and the owners to really say, what do we need on that specific farm to have the same goal? So if we want to do that and optimize, you need to work in a team, and it's amazing how efficient we are as teams these days. When people talked about the industry 25 and 30 years ago, a lot of animal scientists were sitting in one corner and the veterinarians in the other corner and the consultants in another corner, and we didn't optimize all data for a specific farm. What's amazing these days is how we work together as a team. If I visit one of my farms and I drive away from there, I always phone the veterinarian, the management consultant, and we all talk about what we see there so that we convert the same data to each other to optimize. So if I see something wrong or I see something that they are doing well, I talk to my colleagues on the other side, and then they also do that with me, so that we know on a daily basis that what's going on in that farm. Okay, so if we need to use or get data to apply our knowledge on a nutritional side, we use a lot of systems, and I only mention a few of these systems. We use Delpro these days in the feeding parlor to know exactly how much milk animal is giving, as well as other features that the Delpro system is giving us on the animal information side. There's Affimilk systems where we get the same data. We need to get daily milk yields, milk components in some of these systems on a daily basis per animal. We see live weights when they go over the scale out of the parlor. We have pedometers on these animals. We have in some farms rumination monitors. So I get SMS'd when a group of animals show that there is a trend towards a too low rumen pH. And then we also have a lot of precision feeding systems where they track who's feeding where, how the mixer operator is, how accurate are they mixing feeds, as well as a lot of information or systems around calves and calf rearing. So this is just a few examples of technology that farmers or owners buy to really get data to us that is working with the herd. So out of these systems, this is just one example of Affimilk, where we get milk fat and the protein, the lactose from the animals, milk urea, nitrogen, somatic cell counts, all those things that will affect the animal. We get that information from a farm. There's a lot of estrus detection systems that you are well aware of that farmers are using. This is just to optimize our reproduction figures and to improve efficiencies and profits. Another one is Cow Manager. It's a new system in South Africa. It's an old system in the States, where we measure activity of the animal on a daily basis, or actually every 15 minutes. We can evaluate rumination. So there's some nice equations that they've written to predict that from the ear. They actually measure body temperature to know when animals are sick. And then if we use all that data, we can see something like this, where I looked at data yesterday in a herd, and the green line with the red circle is, you can see there's a downward trend in the eat pattern of a group of animals on a specific farm. And when we looked at that, you will see that there was a ration change. They ran out of bruised grains on the 14th of July, but you can see that downward trend, and we can also see eating and rumination times, how active are the animals, how many of the animals are non-active, and see trends in those animals to really, or groups, to give us information to work with to optimize our diet. So a lot of technology, which is nice. This is just a European system where they put systems on the head of the cow to evaluate jaw movement. They can actually predict water drinking patterns, the amount of water that the animals are drinking, eating behavior, rumination. It measures all the motions that animals are going through, lying time, standing time, steps per day, measuring that. The nice about this system is we put 10 to 15 systems per group, especially the fresh cow group, onto this system, and you can get data on those farms to evaluate, are your diets doing well, or do you need to change something in the management to get higher intake? So a lot of nice information, and you can change this from group to group, or I can actually take some of those systems to another farm and evaluate that. And it's expensive to start with, but it's not that expensive if you have the systems to get data. So why do we do all these things? That is to detect nutritional problems, especially on these big operations where you don't have time to see individual cows. So it's just systems to help us. We need to just, evaluate the feed and drinking behavior of cows, because that changes, especially if they change something on a farm or they go into a heat stress periods. We try to monitor these things. If we have acidosis due to a mixing problem, we get immediately signals and also reports from that specific group or a farm, or SMSs to indicate that there's a problem and we need to respond to that. We also measure, especially in Africa, our temperatures in houses, and we do all these things with systems to optimize and our feed management programs and the systems where these animals are in. So now, to get a little bit more practical, to do this, we use a lot of models, and the two main models in South Africa is the AMTS.cattle.pro model, as well as the NDS model that I use. All of them are based on biology, and we try to predict what animals will do on a specific ration, or if there's changes in the environment, what will the effect be on these animals. So it's much more dynamic, and we can optimize which animals are supposed to be in which camp, or how far do they need to walk, which group do we need to put on which diet to really optimize. So it's dynamic, and it's farm specific, and we don't work only with total proteins, but you work with the total biology model that I will show you now. This is just a screenshot of my NDS model, and it was just a diet that I formulated. You can see there's a lot of figures on the everywhere that don't mind about that or worry about that. It's just the ones that we're looking at that I want to show you is that ME allowable milk on this specific diet, and protein allowable milk, that's the 19.4 liters of milk that these animals will give due to energy, and the protein there's enough for 22 liters or 21.9. So this is just for a specific animal. You can see that we put a lot of different things in the model on the animal side. Is how old is the animal, what's the size of the animal, what's the milk solids that we formulate for, how long is the animal in milk, what's our condition score, and many more. So we put that into the model for a specific farm, and then we put in the environment. So in this specific instance, it was a 27-degree temperature herd with a 75 high humidity environment. We show what is the wind speed and how many hours in the sun. So many environmental information that we put into the model to make it much more dynamic. And then also how far are they walking? Is it in a slope, or is it in a flat horizontal distance that they walk? To use as many factors as possible to predict the requirement of a specific group of animals that we formulate for. So this is just information that we put into the model. And to show you some examples, so if I use that specific example of that I formulate for that specific farm, the milk, the energy, allowable milk coming from the energy in the diet, and the protein was that I mentioned the 19.36 and the 21.9 liters of milk that they will probably give in the environmental and distance that or the environmental information that I used. In the distance of close to 3 kilometers, flat distance, with milk solids of 3.15 protein and fat. So if I change the environment and I cool it down to 22 degrees centigrade, or the humidity of 45, look at the energy allowable milk of the same diet. So it's the same diet but different environment, and you can see how much more milk do we get from the same diet if we just have the ability to cool those animals down. So amazing what the models predict and how accurate they are. If on the same diet, animals are walking on a longer distance, so from 1.95 kilometers to 4 kilometers flat distance, and from 20 meters slope to almost a kilometer on a slope, and that's 11 degrees centigrade or 11-degree slope. So it's not that steep that the animals have to walk that distance. Look at their energy allowable milk from the same diet dropped to 11.4 because they utilize that. So if I formulate a diet and I don't go to the management and say, let's optimize the environment, then I have to use more nutrients, more expensive nutrients to get to the same 19 liters instead of just changing a specific factor in that on that farm. And even milk solids, if I use the same diet and I just change some of my fatty acid profiles and I can decrease my milk fat from 3.75 to 3.5, I can increase the milk production of cows. So it's much more dynamic, and for that reason we use models to optimize the management and the environment of that specific farm. So if I talk about a few case studies of how do we apply this knowledge if we go to farms where there's problems. So this was just the Middleburg farm, 200 cows and milk, Holstein cows, and they complained about the cows not milking very well in comparison to the previous year, and there was 3 liters less on average that they milk in comparison to the year before, and the cows had low milk fat. So I had to go in, evaluate that, took the diet, and then saw that there was a few problems in this specific diet. The first 2 things I want to mention is we try to always get physical effective NDF. That's the amount of fiber that we see is larger than 4 millimeters. So we call it physical effective fiber, and that is the fraction in the rumen that's really forming that rumen mat, and that give us that nice rumination and saliva flow in animals. So we always try to get to an optimum level of 22 if we formulate diets. And we always know that if we don't want to see acidosis, we need to stay on the non-fibrous carbohydrates. Fractions must be lower than 42. In this specific diet, you will see that there's a 20.9 on the physical effective NDF, and on the NFC 44.1. So it's high in carbohydrates and it's low in effective fiber. Okay. We always also saw that the feed efficiency was low. It was 1.29 kilograms of energy corrected milk per kilogram of dry matter, which is low for a high producing group that was formulated for over 40 liters. And the benchmark is 1.6 to 1.8 kilograms of energy corrected milk for every kilogram of dry matter. So we knew that there's something wrong. And we also saw the low fiber and the high carbohydrates, and it went through the animals to see photos like this. We saw a lot of very, let me rather say this, very acidotic type of manure. All the manure was loose, it was watery. We also saw a lot of these mucosa cells in the manure of these animals as we walked through the different camps. Then I did a Penn State particle sieve test. That is just a sieve that we use. It's actually, there's 2 screens with a band that we put TMR into, shake it in a very specific way, and then evaluate what's the percentage of fiber over 17 millimeters, and then also over 7 millimeters, and then calculate what's in comparison to the ideal that we need to get to make sure that our animals stay healthy, and that they don't select the feed in the feed trough. So if you have a diet which is very coarse, and the optimum levels of the top sieve is to be between 6 and 12% of the diet. If you use like say for instance 500 grams of your TMR sieve, then we need to have 6 to 12% of the coarser material, 30 to 50% in the medium range. That is between the 7 millimeter and the 17 millimeters, And then the fine material must be less than 55%. If you have a diet which is in this instance too fine, so it was 50 or 5.5%, so not a lot of fiber there. And you can see also in the middle area, also 21.1%. So also in that area, too low. So it's a very almost an overmixed, too fine grinded TMR for animals, and we will not have a rumen mat, the ideal rumen mat formed. And for that instance, you don't have high levels of effective NDF in that ration that they've mixed. They also use some of the long grass or some of the grass. They had to feed 1.6 kilograms of long grass hay, or actually grass hay into the TMR mixer, but they decided to only use 300 or a part of that in the mixer, and the rest as long hay in the rings. But the grass was so poor that they couldn't get intake. So instead of using 1.6 kilograms of the Aarons Ergrosses hay, the animals only utilized 300 grams in comparison to the 1.6 kilograms per cow per day. So if I use that into my model, you can see from the 22% effective NDF that we need, we actually now lower because the animals are not utilizing the Ergrosses hay. And now my NFCs is even higher, the 46%. So now I'm really into a diet that's so high in carbohydrates and so low in fiber. And that's why we've seen the typical signs of acidosis that we experience there in these animals. So I also did some manure sieve tests, and this is just manure sieves that was a few years ago developed or actually manufactured by Dr. Schultheis when he was still at Onderstepoort. He made us all some of these manure sieves, and this is just when you use some of the grab samples, and I did 25 grab samples from the high producing group of animals on this farm, and then put that into the sieves, and they just wash it through with water, and then evaluate what I see on the different screens. And you can see, I hope you can also see the photos well, but on the right hand side on the coarse material, there's a lot of long fiber in there and also a lot of starch that went through the system. This is just a closer photo. You can see a lot of the starch was not digested. There's some long fibers and even whole cotton seeds that went through the animal and into the manure and not digested very well. So what did I change there? I just changed the optimum fiber length, put all the grass into the mixer wagon, tried to change the mixing time in that mixer wagon to get it to mix properly and have more longer fiber in there. So I created a better or more optimal physical effective NDF. I used less maize. The maize that was used, I recommended to them to fine grind it and not use coarse maize. And all those things was used. And within 21 days, you can just see that was February. The high producing group was sitting on 32.6 liters, with the first lactation animals on 26.4 and the late lactation animals 21.2. Within 21 days after making the changes, you can see there's a big shift in production and an upward trend. So instead of applying nutrition and giving them more protein, more energy, we just changed all the things that they do on that specific farm to optimize things and really get more out of the diet, which is more cost effective instead of just throwing more buffers at them or more nutrients. So it's a big improvement in feed conversion rate, and therefore the farmer were making more money. This was just another case study in Bethel, where I was phoned on a Sunday to say, come and help. There's acidosis on the farm. I went there. It's a 600 cow unit milking Holsteins. 8 cows died on the Sunday and 3 more the following week, which is a huge loss to the farmer, and not only animals but also the emotions on that farm, losing animals due to acidosis. The milk dropped from a 34-liter average to 23-liter average per cow per day. So that was, you can see between the animals and the milk loss, they lost about R1 million within that first month after this incident. So it took them 2 months to get back, and I didn't even calculate the reproduction or the longevity loss of animals, or even the milk price loss that we've seen on that specific farm. So what did we do? We went in, evaluated the animals. This was just photos from my veterinarian colleague on that farm. When he did the post-mortems on those 8 cows, you can see there's not a lot of rumen papillae left in that rumen, all burnt away. So what happened? Well, on the Saturday, the operator on the mixer wagon decided to ignore the mixing sheet and replaced 7.7 kilograms of dry matter maize silage with just hammer milk maize, because they didn't want to drive to the maize silage area to save time. So they just replaced that with maize in the TMR, and that's why it changed the whole rumen pH, and we saw a lot of rumen acidosis. Now, you will see when you get the slides afterwards, I included some of the detail on rumen pH and acidosis and what we see in animals, what happened when they experience acidosis. So I'm not going to stay or spend a lot of time on ruminal acidosis, but the critical factors that we know will happen is we will kill some of the microbes in the rumen. We know that the fermentation product and end products will totally change. The motility and the absorption function in the rumen will totally change, and therefore our feed intake and the health of the animals, due to all the endotoxins, etc., will be influenced, and that's why we see a lot of lower production and efficiencies when we experience acidosis. Now, we must not underestimate acidosis on dairy farms. I must say it's one of the things that we handle quite frequently on dairy operations, and that's due to mixing and the skills of people working with the feed on farms. And I don't think there's a week going past where we don't have acidosis somewhere and where we are called in to come and help. So it's for you as veterinarians that will go into the dairy industry, this is things that we see a lot on dairy operations. Okay, we all know that what's the effect, but as I said, I will not get into the detail. But there's some slides on leaky gut. There's also some slides on the changes that we experience on those farms. So as I said, it's interaction. If we talk nutrition, it's always between me and the vets. There's as I mentioned already, a nice team effort that we on a daily basis handle some of the data and share to make sure that we get to the bottom of everything, and especially if we focus on efficiencies. So this is just a case study on heifer growth. I was called in a while ago to say, listen, we don't see on our system, they just used African system. But you can see the growth on the growth charts in this specific herd. All the animals are well below the ideal growth chart that I had for that specific herd. And we had to go in and say, what changed over time. And this was just a herd that changed from, they moved animals from one farm to a new farm. And we suddenly saw that the heifers were not growing. So on this specific farm, the aim was always to grow higher than 750 grams per day on the heifers, on the average. But on this new farm, we saw that that average daily gain dropped to less than 550 grams. That's why most of them are below the chart. So normally what people will think is in nutrition, let's just give them more nutrients so that we can get the gains up to where it was formulated for. But my view is always to go into the nutrition a different route, and that's first check, is there things wrong on that specific farms or farm to really optimize what we are getting out of the diet. The mortality was always below 4% in this specific herd up to 12 months, and now suddenly it was over 8%. And then what they also saw is when they wean the animals, they really drop to a low average daily gain in the first 4 weeks after weaning, and then afterwards it's they're getting back to a higher growth rate. But we had to go into looking at the detail. Sorry for this bad photos, but I think that you will. I will show you some signs that or signals that I evaluated in that specific farm. So if you look at this calf pen on the left-hand side, you will see that as they stay in this specific pen, the manure is just growing in height, and the feed bucket as well as the water trough. And remember, they also get the same in the same water trough area, so they will just replace the water trough with the milk trough, or the trough with the milk in will go into the same fixture on that gate in front of that calf. So what was interesting is as the manure just grow higher and higher, that those two buckets were getting too low for the animal to really eat and drink. And on the right hand side, you will see my recommendation for them was just to lift it and make it also higher, so that the animal can drink in a normal way and eat in a normal way and height, instead of trying to get to that low area. So I changed that position. What I also saw is in the area where they wean animals is there was no water in the water troughs and a lot of manure in the feed troughs. So I changed or made recommendations to them to change those animals, and it was also the size of the group was too big. So instead of taking them out of the hutches into a group of 5 animals and then later to 10, they just took them out of that single pen calf unit into groups of 25, which is, in my view, too many animals, and you give them a lot of too much stress that animals go through if they come from the single pen into too large or too big group of animals. You will also see on the right hand side there were small little heifers, but there was also a big heifer in there. So we can't allow that. They must be in age groups and weight groups similar to each other instead of in a big mixed group. So I changed that, made recommendations to that, and then the average daily gains just went up back to the 750 or over 750 mark, and the mortalities came down. So applying knowledge on nutrition is not, as I said, giving more nutrients, but go into the system and evaluate that to change things to really make it better for the animals. This was just another case study where we had the same problem, very low daily gains that they had on that farm, and also using a very expensive feed replacer mixed at 125 grams per liter, but not getting any gains from that. So after asking a few questions on that farm, They thought they used 125 grams per liter and mixing water of 40 degrees centigrade. I went into the system and evaluated that. So a few things that I checked is they didn't wean animals on 60 or 56 days as they said. They actually weaned them at 77 days. But what was interesting is that they didn't use 125 grams per liter of milk replacer. They only used 111. And why was that? And it's a problem that you as veterinarians will see a lot on dairy farms, is people are putting the water in first, a liter, and then add the 125 grams on top of that. And if you mix that and back calculate, you will see that the quantity is then not as recommended. So it's always good, and my recommendation and evaluation always on those farms is first put the powder in and then add the water to the 1 liter mark, and then your concentration will be okay. And they have to check that on a weekly basis. If you don't do that, people change that over time, and then you suddenly see lower average daily gains to that. Another interesting point on that specific farm is they thought they are using 40 degrees centigrade water, but they didn't. When I tested all the temperatures on the water in different sessions where they mixed the milk, it was 73 degrees. Which is actually way too hot when you use milk replacer with that. And we know that if you use hot water like that on milk replacer, it's very negative on protein digestibility, and you actually destroy some of those proteins. So another thing that we saw on that farm is they only use 4 liters of milk per animal, and remember it's lower density milk because they used the wrong concentration. And I recommended to them to use a program where we use a higher quantity, 150 grams per liter at a specific stage, where we put that into a program starting with 4 liters for the first 7 days, and then 5 liters, and a step up program up to a specific age, and then we bring it down in the step down program, and then wean them at 56 days in life. So I changed that. This was just a growth chart of those animals. You will see the purple or blue one, triangles is the old program, and you will see by feeding them at that specific density, there's not enough nutrients for them to really grow at the average of 750 grams per day. But by changing the program of how they feed and how much or how many liters they feed, you can see that you can increase that growth chart over time. Going into a winter, so that was the summer one, but the old system, you can see in winter time, if animals are experience a winter period of night temperatures of around 5 degrees centigrade, on the old system, there was not enough nutrients for them to grow in the first 3 weeks of life. On the new system that I changed, it was just higher quantities, and now you can see that at least they grow better in comparison to the old system. So by applying this, is we've got better growth rates. So what we've seen in that specific farm, there's a need for a winter and a summer program. There's also a need to increase the concentration and the amount of liters to really get to a higher daily gain, because we know at this stage with all the publications around the world that if we get better gains from heifers in the first 7 weeks of life, and I'm going to say that again, if we can get better daily gains at up to the age of 7 weeks of life, we get more milk out of those animals in the first 3 lactations. So it's one thing that we focus on many dairies a lot, and that's to give animals a better growth rate in that first 7 weeks of life. exactly the same what we do on these more intensified sheep units these days. We try to get those young lambs to grow very quickly over that first 7 weeks of life, because we get better production out of those animals later in life, and they have a better feed conversion as well. So extremely important for you as veterinarians and for us is to evaluate these animals, the daily gains, make sure that they wean at higher rates. Then if I can go on with the case study on roughage quality, I think Richard did an extremely good job of explaining to you silages, because silages is one of the most important roughage sources in South Africa. I know on the pasture-based farms, they use a lot of the pastures, but they also feed silages during periods where there's not enough available. But on the Highveld, this was just one example where I was called in to help a 750 cow unit, which saw a lot of variance in dry matter intakes, as well as milk production variances on that specific farm. They had a diet that was formulated for around 40 liters. And you can see the group average was, it was formulated for 39.7 on energy side and protein 42.26 where the red circle is. The group average was 31.1 liter, but the 7-day dry matter intake coefficient of variance was 11%, which is high. We try to have variances from day to day of less than 2.5 to 3%. In this herd, it was 11%. So it was just too high for animals to milk consistent. And I had to go and look at what was the problem. The thing that we've seen is they used quite a high level of, and I didn't open up the diet, but they used about 22 kilograms of wet silage per cow per day in this herd. I think I will show it a little bit later. But the dry matter variance on 4 samples that I took, actually 2 samples that I took from the face of the bunker within the 1 week. I split both samples and did the analysis twice on those samples, and you will see the dry matter on the one sample is 38.02, and another sample on another date was 31.4 kilograms percent dry matter. So you will think, is that important? The proteins was quite close, but the dry matters, there was a huge difference. So to show you in this diet, this was just the animals received the 22 kilograms of wet on paper as formulated by the nutritionist. That was calculated to be 8.34 kilograms of dry matter that the animals received on a daily basis. But if you compare the 38.02 dry matter, that was close to the formulated diet by the nutritionist. And you can see if I use my calculations or my dry matter, instead of getting 22.1 kilograms of dry matter of wet silage, they received 21.9 kilograms of wet silage. But if you compare the other sample of another date in the same silage bunker, which was the 31.4 kilograms, if they still fed the 22.1 kilogram, they were supposed to increase that because it's now wetter. They had to increase, or was supposed to increase it to 26.6 kilogram in the mixer, but they did not. They were still feeding the 22.9, which actually decreased the amount of dry matter. And that's why Richard mentioned that dry matters on any wet material where we use animals on a TMR mixed operation. They have to do that on a daily basis. Almost all my clients are doing that before 6 in the morning, go to all the dry material, the wet materials, the silages, the wet bruised grains, all those things. Do a dry matter on that, and then they change their recipe or the dry matters on the recipe so that the cows are still getting, for in this example, the 8.34 kilograms of dry matter. If they don't do that, they will experience acidosis the one day if they underfed that, or they will increase the fiber in the diet if they don't correct that and they're overfeeding the silage in the TMR, and the animal have to adapt on a daily basis according to the amount that they get. So if they can increase or actually increase or decrease the dry matters on a daily basis, the animal will get on a daily basis that 8.34 kilograms. Remember this, because this is one of the biggest challenges on dairy farms that we see working with those big farms. It's a struggle if you don't force them to follow a protocol of doing that in the morning, every morning, if you want to have good efficiencies on farms. So remember, dry matter, dry matter, dry matter, if you work with those farms. So, I'm always saying, as Richard mentioned in what he did in his presentation, silage does vary in bunkers. There's still many people thinking that today's silage in the same bunker is the same as tomorrow. It's not. And that's why high producing herds test bunkers on a daily basis. And some of my clients do that 3 times a day to make sure that they adjust their mixers to get more out of the diets. In this diet, if you don't do that, for example, the 22 kilograms, if you don't adjust that, the animal will lose 2.63 liters of milk due to the under or overproduction of some of the nutrients. Instead of losing one condition score in 103 days, in some days the nutrient supply and the dry matter intakes will be different, and that can drop to 64 days. So losing much more condition if the silages are not adjusted. So it's a massive effect on these animals, and we need to do that. So a lot of farmers are using a microwave to do that. It's easy, it's consistent, as long as your methodology, your people are trained on methodology so that they know how to do that and do it every day in the same way, and then adjust the mixes in the feeder wagon on a daily basis. I think Richard already mentioned a lot of things. But the days are gone when we only measure protein, fiber, fat, and dry matter on these roughages. We do a lot more. So we look at the in vitro true digestibilities. We look at digestible NDF and many more nutrients, even starch and starch digestibility, because that's different from feed bunker or between bunkers. So we need to always remember that it's not about only protein and fiber like in the old days. We need to check on digestibilities as well. And I'm going to show you just one example. If you take starch degradability in the rumen, and you take or you compare a pile or a bunker which has silage in there, which is say 3 months old. That's what the left-hand arrow, red arrow is. So it's that silage in the bunker is 3 months old, and the same silage is in that bunker, and compare that to the same silage which is a little bit older, 10 months. And we all know that it's like red wine. The older the silage is, the better the starch degradability is in a bunker. So if you move a herd from a diet on old silage, say for instance silage that's 12 months old, and you go to silage which is 3 months old or even less, the milk production will drop because you have a lower degradability and digestibility of the starch. The older it gets, the better it gets in that silage bunker. So in a high producing herd, that change from young silage, if I can call it that, to mature silage, which is 10 months old, that you will see in milk production in high producing cows is 4.6 liters. Just that change on the same starch, same NDF, everything, but in a different digestibility. So remember always, if you go to that farm and they say that they lose milk in February, March every year, ask them how old is their silage. If it's young silage in comparison to where they were with more mature silage, they will go into that bunker, they will lose money. It's not a nutritional problem, it's due to the age of that silage. And we need to change that and give them more energy and more digestible nutrients if you want to be on the same level. The same for beef steers and feedlots. The daily gains is about 140 grams just on that degradability point or digestibility on the starch. And the same that we experience in feedlot lambs, also a decrease. If you go from a young silage to older mature silage, you get that benefit of better performance of the animals. Now, it doesn't seem to be a lot, but in a 200 cow dairy unit, that is about 27,600 liters per month, or a 5,000 beef feedlot unit, that's 12.5 tons of meat that you will lose just due to that if you don't rectify that. So if you work there, make sure that they use more mature silage if they can, if they have the cash flow to always have that in hand. It's always nice to get more out of that. As I said, silage or there's variance in that. So I'm going to quickly go just to the last one, and that's when we have minerals. Just a thing that I want to share with you. There's a few more that you can go through in the extra slides that I provided with some other case studies on minerals. This was just a case study where there was a red coat on the mature heifers that the AI, that was the stage or the age where animals were in the AI group, and they saw a lot of this red hair in the animals. Just before I show this, I just want to show you, no, I will get to that. What we've always also saw on this specific farms on pasture, it's a pasture-based farm. And if I see Holstein animals with a red skin, I always go to minerals first. What we see is there's a lot of variance, and especially in the Tsitsikamma area where this farm were, if you look at the average iron levels in my data set, it's about 475 milligrams per kilogram. But I always also have farms where the pasture was over 5,000 milligrams per kilogram of iron. The same variance is there for manganese and copper and zinc as well. And we need to adjust our rations according to this to make sure that we apply specific sources. And I think Alex Jenkins will talk about different sources and the effect on the animals. So I'm not going to show anything on that. But remember, there's variance. This farm, I also tested the water. Look at the high iron level. You can't probably see it, but it's also over 4,000. It's 4,070 milligrams of iron that we saw in the water. Also high in manganese during my evaluation on this specific farm. So we changed the source of these animals, the minerals in there. We also changed the water system because we couldn't get to lower levels, and the farm owner installed the filter system to get rid of some of the micronutrients, which is quite expensive, but they decided to do that. What was interesting is the AIs per conception before we changed everything was about 3.8 AIs per conception, which was really bad for heifers. So after changing everything in this specific farm, where we saw the red hair as well as the bad reproduction, it took them 7 weeks to really see any changes in the color of the skin. But after 6 months, the AIs per conception was down from 3.8 to 2.1, which is, in my view, still too high, but at least it came down. And I think it's due to all the condition of the animal that was also still improving in those animals, that why the figures was still a little bit on the high side. But things like this, when you go into herds, it's easy to just see the signals on the animals and then go into the detail and change that with that in that regard as well. So the last, I thought that was the last slide, but this was just another one where we saw a problem in the herd in Heidelberg area, south of Johannesburg. I was called in to say the AIs per conception was 4.7. Mortalities of the cows was very high, over 11%. High somatic cell counts, but almost a third of the cows had mastitis and a very low milk production in comparison to previous years. So this is just a few photos, very, very bad manure that I've seen in those animals, and also most of the cows was below a 2 condition score. So again, many nutritionists will change the diets, but I rather went into the detail looking at that at the analysis and what we could find. One of the things that they used is they used green chop lucerne that was produced on fields where they use a lot of manure spreading as their fertilizer. And what I've seen there is very high iron levels in that specific green chop lucerne. So bring that back to the TMR. We've also analyzed the TMR and also saw that high levels of iron. Now, we all know that if you go over 450 ppms of iron, that we see a decrease in immunity of those animals. So I just took that out, decided to take the lucerne out of the TMR, which was the main culprit in my view, and within a short period, they increased 2 liters within 4 weeks, and in 4 months' time, they increased their milk production 4.7 liters in those animals. We saw a better coat appearance. Mastitis cases was much lower, still high, but much better. And according to the veterinarian, the repro figures improved quite tremendously. So this is just a few things regarding applied nutrition and what we do as a team on these farms to see the signals from the cows and evaluate what they are, what environment they are in, and change our diets and management of the diets differently to get the best out of the cows. So that's just from my side, Lillian.
Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you for your presentation. We don't have much time for questions as we are already 20 minutes past our time. But nevertheless, how does the nutrition needs or diet of dairy goats differ from that of dairy cows?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. It's, if we look into the literature, and that's why we use models which can also be used in small ruminants. A lot of people use the strategy of what a 650 cow is using, and then divide that by 10 to get to a 65 kilogram ewe. That is totally different. So we use models to predict exactly what the animals or those goats require to really make sure that they are utilizing the nutrients better. So we can't use any research from cows for dairy goats. They are totally different animals. They have a totally different ratio of lower intestine to rumen. And we feed them differently. So they have the enzymes to digest NDF better in comparison to dairy cows. So a dairy cow, we will use a lot of maize starch, but in dairy goats, we use much more digestible NDF, and they also respond better to small grains. So they do better on barley and wheat in comparison to what the cows are doing. Cows like maize starch better, and model that to utilize in those animals. So I hope I answered that specific question to that person.
Okay, then the last question is, can you make an approximate estimate of rumen pH by measuring the pH of a fresh fecal sample in order for the farmer to evaluate changes in the rumen pH easier?
My short answer is no, you can never do that. There's enough evidence showing that there is no correlation between the manure of animals, even if you test that within 15 minutes after taking that sample in comparison to what's going on in the rumen. The fermentation in the rumen and the hindgut influence that. So it's not a good prediction. I was part of a team of researchers in the Netherlands where we evaluated, I think it was close to 8,000 manure samples in comparison to the pH, measuring the pH in the rumen, and there was no correlation. So never use the manure to estimate rumen pH.